Hello, welcome back to my code along. In this episode, we're going to talk about the level Ice Hunter. So Ice Hunter isn't a particularly hard level, but the levels Northwest and Highlanders, they're a little bit more difficult. And once we understand the concepts in Ice Hunter, I think those levels will be easier
My
to beat.
staff will guide you.
Quick advice though.
Code.
So in this level, or any other level that involves yaks, I suggest not using a magic-based character. And the reason being is just that they don't really have great aim. So once you try to aim at something, you end up attracting a whole bunch of unwanted attention and just kind of get ganked by all these yaks. Okay, so in this level, we need to defeat 4 yaks, and the yaks must have the substring boast in their name. The way we're going to do this is use the function isSubstring and pass the name and the substring boast through that function. Yeah, so I actually need to reload this level. So we're starting off with a blank slate. The first thing they're going to ask us to do is provide an if statement. And we need to pass the substring, or the function isSubstring, with the enemy ID, which would be the name, and the substring boast. We need to attack the enemy. What is going on? Oh, I have an S here instead of ID. So that didn't work out at all, and the reason being is we have the hero attacking once and then moving on to the next enemy, and the enemy is obviously not dead. So let's create a while loop. So we're going to attack the enemy until their health is 0. Let's give that another try. Yeah, and I pretty easily beat the level. The problem is, although I beat the level, we still kind of don't know what's going on because we need to review this function isSubstring. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. So if you're having a hard time understanding this function isSubstring, I don't blame you. It's a pretty confusing concept. We have a for loop within a for loop, and whenever we put this function over here, down here, we're also putting that into another for loop. So it's kind of like the inception of programming. Let's talk about the first for loop in this function. So the first thing we need to do to understand this function is find a good test subject. And the test subject that we're going to use is Gilbosa the yak. So the first thing that this function is doing is creating the variable right edge. To get the variable right edge, we are subtracting the length of the substring from the length of the word. So we're subtracting the 3 letters of boast from the 8 letters of Gilbosa to get 5. So the variable of right edge equals 5. So what is the variable right edge? Right edge is just the number of possible positions that the word boast could be contained in the word Gilbosa. Notice that if we go too far right, we do not have enough characters in the word Gilbosa to match up with the characters in the substring boast. Hence the name right edge. If you're wondering why right edge is equal to 5 and not 6, just remember that arrays start off at 0. Let's take a look at the second for loop. The second for loop iterates through the characters of the substring boast. On the right side, we can see each of the iterations that our for loops go through until they meet the requirements to attack. If you're wondering how I got these numbers before I understood how this function worked, the answer is as simple as I set up a test environment, and you can do the same thing too. So instead of using the enemy.id, I switched that out and just put our test subject in, which is Gilbosa, and that gets fed into the function. And then I added a whole bunch of hero.say commands. I wanted to know what the I command was, what the J command, and the shifted index. I pressed run, and my hero gave me all the numbers I needed to know. Let's see this test function in action. So the first thing it tries to do is match up the first character of the substring with the first character of the word. It fails. So the first character of the substring with the second character of the word. It fails. It fails again. It fails again. And finally finds a match. So once it finds that first match, it moves on to the second character of the substring both. It's successful, and then successful again, and then we orchestrate an attack. Now let's take a look at this if statement. We're also going to use a new test subject, which is Dracus the yak. So if we're looking at this if statement, what we're doing in this statement is comparing each character of the word to each character of the substring. And when they do not match, what we're going to do is break out of the second loop and go back to the first loop where we're trying to find the position of the substring within the word. So let's pretend like we're starting the function. So we're comparing the first character of the substring to the first character of the word, and it does not pass. It doesn't match. Same thing happens again. It fails again. It fails. And we have failed every iteration of these loops, and we're passing a false value and going to the next name. Now we're iterating through the name Abbott. The first character of the substring both does not match the first character of the name Abbott, so we fail and go on to the next position. The B's match, the O's match, but the T and the S don't. So we're gonna break out of this loop and go back to the first loop and go on to the next position. So it does not match, and that is the last of our iterations. So we're gonna break out of the second loop and return a false value and move on to the next name. We now know how the majority of this function works. We understand that the first for loop is iterating the number of positions that the substring can be contained into the word. We also understand that the second for loop is iterating through each character of the substring. We know that this if statement is looking for mismatched characters in the substring so that it can break out of the second loop and return back to the first loop. Now let's go over the next if statement. This if statement is returning a true value. A true value means we found a matching substring in the word. Since we found the substring both in the word Gilbosa, that means that we can attack that yak. How this iteration works is it's looking for an iteration that is equal to the substring's length minus 1. Why do we subtract the 1? Remember that an array starts at 0, so the last character in an array would be the length of the substring minus 1. So, if we were to watch this if statement in action, the second for loop would iterate through the substring's characters. 0 does not match 2. 1 does not match 2, but 2 does equal 2. Therefore, we found our boss in the name Gilbosa, and our hero attacks that yak. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around, and here's a cookie. I hope you crushed this level, and I hope you crushed the levels Northwest and Highlanders. Join me next time on my Code Combat JavaScript adventures.